Hello and welcome to the Aaron Werner podcast on iCode Media. Today I talk with Dr. Cheryl Chapman about a new study recently published in JAMA titled The Low Dose 0.01% Atropine Eye Drops versus Placebo for Myopia Control, a Randomized Clinical Trial. It's very important to us that we always practice evidence-based medicine, and so Cheryl and I chat about what we learned from this study and how this may or may not affect how we currently treat children with myopia using atropine. So we would love for you to be part of the conversation, so please leave a comment, share with a friend, and leave us a 5-star review. Also be sure to support those who support us. This year, we proudly introduced the Life Meter to our practice in response to our staff's passionate demand for enhanced patient care. Their firsthand experience with the Life Meter underscored the crucial link between proper diet, carotenoid supplementation, and visual health and performance. Our front desk team now measures every patient's skin carotenoid levels, providing valuable education on each score and the significance of carotenoids in ocular performance and health. The result? Patients love the enhanced experience, and our MacuHealth sales have doubled since implementing Life Meter. To discover more, contact your MacuHealth representative or click on the link in the show notes. All right, Cheryl, we have excited for the conversation because just recently, in fact, July 13th in JAMA, we have a new atropine study that was released, and you have been my go-to person for all things atropine. It's nice knowing somebody on the front edge who understands it all and can take all the the topics, the discussions, and simplify it down for those of us who may not be doing it as much. But new study released, and so I wanted to dive into your thoughts on the study, what if this means anything different on how you're looking at atropine or how we're all going to be looking at atropine, and all that good stuff.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm always happy to talk about it. You know, it's not that this stuff is hard to understand. The difficult part is that new stuff comes out so frequently that your average practitioner just doesn't have a chance to keep up with it all and to read it all. And so I wasn't at all surprised to get your email because I've gotten over the last week and a half, I have gotten multiple emails and calls with people asking, hey, what do you think of this? And it's really interesting because it really got a lot of coverage. I saw posts on it on Facebook, online Facebook forums. I was getting emails even from folks who are not actually optometrists, who are just business people who are kind of watching some of these technologies and who are looking at, investing in some of these technologies. So it's just really interesting how far of a reach things have gotten. 10 years ago, nobody outside of a small group of optometrists really was paying attention to this. And now it's really gotten a lot of global reach.
Yeah. Which is awesome. I think it's something that I don't want to say neglected, but neglected. I don't think it was mainstreamed as it should have been. It certainly wasn't primary care, and definitely not standard of care looking and treating myopia. So I love the fact that there's lots of discussion around it. But and that's science for us, right? We get different studies that seemingly tell us different things, and we've got to weed through it all. So let's walk through this study, and I'll put the link in the show notes. But it was published, like I said, in JAMA on July 13th of this year, 2023, titled Low Dose 0.01% Atropine Eye Drops versus Placebo for Myopia Control, a Randomized Clinical Trial by Repka et al. And so walk us through what this study's looking at, and then we'll talk about what their findings were.
Okay, cool. So I think it's really fun to practice evidence-based medicine. And when we really dive into these studies, there's some certain things that you always want to be kind of mindful of. Was the study paid for by somebody who's got some sort of proprietary interest? Was the study double masked? Not all studies can be, but a study like this is very easy to double mask. What's really interesting is, was there a placebo? In this study, yes, there was a placebo. And I will kind of talk through some of the other atropine studies that are kind of famous and talk about why maybe that's so important. So with this study in particular, what they did, the study was started in 2018 and it was concluded in 2022. And what they did was they took a placebo and they took 0.01% atropine and they compared them, and they had I think they had like 187 kids in the study or something like that, fewer than 200.
Yep.
And kids age 5 to 12, and kids that were, I think, somewhere between a -1 and a -6 in their current myopia prescriptions when they started the study. And the most unusual or unique thing about this study is that it was a US-based study. And the reason that's important is because a lot of these other atropine studies were done on really like East Asian populations for the most part. And so the data that we're getting out of this is a little bit different because the population was a little bit different. Or it could be, right? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it could be. And so I think that's the most compelling part. Now, the study ran for, like I said, from 2018 to 2022. The kids that were in the study were treated for, I believe, 24 months, and then they did another 6-month follow-up after they concluded treatment. And the study findings were that there was not really a statistically significant difference between those kids treated with placebo and those kids treated with 0.01% low-dose atropine. And they were measuring spherical refractive equivalent, so the prescription change, as well as axial length changes. And so I think that this study can be a little misleading because so much of the bylines on it, so much of the stuff that kind of like went out into the news was like, breaking news, 0.01% low-dose atropine not effective for myopia control. Boom. And mic drop, right? So then like all these people are like, oh my God, we can't treat with atropine. No. If you read the fine line right at the end, it's like, and we think maybe we need to study higher concentrations in this population. Oh, okay. Well, that's great. Now let's dial it back a little bit. Let's keep in mind that we did this study, or this study was started in summer of 2018. Well, now let's think about some of the other studies we've had. ADAM1, famous study that looked at placebo versus 1% atropine. 1%, super duper effective, also lots of side effects. So then they did ADAM2 study. And I think ADAM1 was done in like 2003 or something like that, long time ago.
Yep.
Okay, so if you look at the ADAM2 study, which was done, I think in 2011, you have no placebo. That's key. There was no placebo. They used 0.01, 0.1, 0.5. So those were not nearly as low dose as what many of us are treating with today. The 0.01 they used thinking it was like a placebo. That's my understanding. And then they saw that what their interpretation was of the results at that time was they saw that there was some effect in slowing that refractive equivalent, that spherical refractive equivalent, with the 0.01. Well then, but there were also like almost no side effects, right? And so then they published that data, and then everyone got super excited about ADAM2. And everyone was like, let's treat everybody with 0.01. Done, okay? So a lot of doctors were doing that, but a lot of doctors who were measuring axial length at that time, and I was one of them because I started off with 0.01 on all these kiddos, I was measuring axial length, and I was finding that the axial length was still changing too much. So then I was just sort of like, every case, I just was like increasing their low-dose atropine from 0.01 up to a slightly higher dose. At the time, the pharmacy I was using, I could go to 0.02, 0.03, and so on. And so I would do that until I saw it slow down. And then we all got really excited when the LAMP study came out, because the LAMP study had a placebo. They compared a placebo to 0.01, but they also compared it to 0.025 and 0.05. So those two concentrations are less than the higher concentrations that were in that ADAM2 study. And the conclusions of the LAMP study, which were published like somewhere in later 2018, early 2019, which is, again, keep in mind, shortly after the study that we're talking about today that was just published, shortly after that study started. So LAMP was published right after they started this study. So they didn't know the LAMP results when they started this study. But the LAMP results told us that it is dose dependent. meaning that the efficacy, the control you're getting depends on the concentration of atropine. The 0.05 was more effective than the 0.025, which was more effective than the 0.01, which could be marginally more effective than placebo, but really not that much. And the difference is in the axial length, not so much the spherical refractive equivalent, which we know that our more modern optical biometers that we use to measure axial length with, we know that they are more effective at seeing changes early on because they're so accurate. The one that I use is accurate up to 0.01 millimeters margin of error. One of the other ones on the market that's really popular is accurate up to 0.03 millimeters margin of error. So that's very accurate. And we're going to see, we might not see a change in refractive error until that patient is changed by about maybe 0.2, 0.25 millimeters. So it's really important if you're using atropine to think about how those changes are happening with axial length before you will see them with the refraction.
Cheryl, how soon do you think that, or how far after a change in axial length do you think you see a change in refraction?
So are you asking me how much axial length change do you need?
No, just if you're going to see, so you're measuring a kid, you're monitoring a child for myopia management, and their spherical equivalent refraction stays the same, but you notice an elongation of the axial length. In your mind, are you thinking, hey, the next time I see them, or in 6 months, I'm going to see that change be reflective in a prescription change?
Well, that's a really good question. So if I'm monitoring a patient and I am seeing that their axial length is kind of creeping up a little bit, how soon do I think it might be reflected in their refractive error? It depends on how much they're changing, right? So sometimes you're slowing that progression by literally 100% stoppage. Like they're not changing at all. Sometimes you've reduced progression by 80%, but they're still changing a little bit. Sometimes you've reduced progression by 50%, but they're still changing a little bit. So how fast they're still progressing really affects how soon you might see that change in refractive error. A lot of the kiddos that I have on atropine are really, really stable, and I'm not seeing those changes in refractive error. If I do see it kind of creeping a little bit, sometimes I won't see that change until 9 months or a year in, where they get like a quarter more. And so I feel like if I can make those adjustments in their atropine concentration, then I can certainly adjust treatment and really avoid those refractive changes almost altogether. Not all kids are responsive to atropine. There's a small percentage of kids who just really don't seem to have a good response to it, no matter what you do. And that's kind of frustrating, but for the most part, it is very effective. I would also say that I personally usually start with about 0.025% atropine. But a lot of doctors who rely heavily on the LAMP study, they will still start with 0.05%. Now, my reasoning for starting with that lower mid, I would call it kind of a mid concentration, that 0.025, my reasoning for starting with that is because I don't have an East Asian population for the most part. I have a very the Midwest. We are, very Caucasian, more Western European, German heritage, Czechoslovakian, Irish, stuff like that. And so we don't know exactly. So it is really interesting for me to see this study that's come out now that's on a US population. But it didn't really tell me anything I didn't already know. It told me not to use 0.01%, but I'm already not using 0.01%. So I usually start with 0.025, and I would say about half the time, and I didn't do a statistical analysis on this, but about half the time that works for my patient population, and about half the time it doesn't. And so about every other kid that I've got on atropine, it seems like I'm bumping them up to that 0.05. But I figure if I can use 0.025 effectively on half of my kids, I'm going to. Because I want the lowest amount of pharmaceutical going into their system as possible. And I know also when they're older, when we stop their atropine, the lower dose I was able to maintain them on, the less rebound effect they're more likely to have. That's what our studies so far are showing us on that. And we'll know more, as more studies come out.
Oh, absolutely. So what are your markers for when you start a new kid on the 0.025? When are you going to say this isn't enough, I'm going to jump up? Is it any sort of change? Is it a progressive change that you see over time? What is your trigger?
So what's my trigger? There's a couple of factors that I'm looking at. Like, what are the kids' risk factors, right? Like, what is their ethnicity? If they're like an East Asian kid, maybe I start them out on 0.05 from the get-go. If they already have a long axial length, if they are a young age, if they already have that high refractive error. So it varies. If I've got, let's say I've got a 6-year-old kid who's a -5 and they are already a 25 millimeter eye. Let's say for some reason I started them on 0.025 instead of 0.05. And I bring them back in and I see that their axial length didn't change at all. Great. Maybe their axial length is actually shorter because they've had a little bit of choroidal thickening. Great. Maybe their axial length changed by 0.05 or 0.06 in that 3-month period. I'm probably okay with that with a 6-year-old. Now, let's say I've got that very same patient. Let's say they're 15 years old. They're a -5. They're a 25 millimeter eye. And they change by 0.05, 0.06. That's not okay. That 16-year-old kid, that 15-year-old kid shouldn't grow as much as a 6-year-old should grow. So we have to keep that in mind. We're getting more and more growth curves coming out. And I think I've shared some of those with you in the past, Aaron.
And I'll attach those here because those are super helpful.
Yeah, it's helpful to be able to look at that because you can use that when you're making these treatment decisions to kind of look at it and say, okay, well, where should this kid be in terms of rate of growth? And maybe if that kid is only a 24 millimeter eye, I'm less aggressive than if they're a 26 millimeter eye. Because I know that risk of pathology goes way, way up and the risk of vision loss goes way, way up after that eye exceeds 26 millimeters. As many as 1 out of 4 people who have a 26 millimeter eye will have vision loss by age 75. And vision loss in that study was defined as 20/40 or worse.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you're the doctor. Be the doctor, analyze the data, try and understand the data as best you can, and customize it, right? Customize it for that patient based on how high you perceive their risk to be and how much change you feel like is acceptable for that patient.
Very cool. How many of your patients come in referencing the studies?
It's really funny because you have a variety of personalities that come in as parents, right? So when you have a patient that doesn't know anything about myopia management, which is common in some of our markets, and they come in and you're just educating them on what is myopia and why do we care? And they're sort of hesitant. They're like, well, do we really care? Can we just make their glasses stronger? That's not the parent that's coming and referencing the studies. But then you've also got this other demographic of parents who are, like their kids, they're pushing their kids. Academic rigor is like paramount in their house. They're pushing their kids to be like super involved. Let's do resume builders. You have to have a good resume by the time you're 10. You're going to study 24/7. You're going to go to the best schools. You're going to have the best education. We're going to work you. And those are the parents that are coming in with the studies. And they've read the studies and they're asking about the studies and they're like, well, have you read this study? And it's kind of intimidating if you, as the doctor, haven't read the study, but you can always say, I haven't seen that one yet, but I have read a lot of the studies and I'd be more than happy to read that one, and get back to you on what my feedback is. Like you don't have to be intimidated by that parent as long as you have kind of a canned response of what you're going to say, because you will have these parents that come in with these studies. And it's interesting because sometimes it's dangerous how much they do know because they don't actually understand a lot of it. And so they're armed with just the wrong amount of knowledge, if that makes sense.
They know just enough to be dangerous. And
they absolutely do.
Awesome. Which is an interesting topic because at least when I was growing up, your doctor said something, you did it. I would have never questioned my doctor. I would have never questioned any of my school teachers. But now patients have the same access to the same information you and I do. and they can find it just as easily, if not quicker, while they're sitting in the exam room chair. So I think it is important to have that, I hate the term canned response, but prepared response for when you do get challenged on something you're not ready to respond back on.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You'll see the funniest things. Like you'll see parents come in with spreadsheets of their child's visual acuity, both AM and PM. Uh, and it's like, oh my gosh, right?
I've
Like
seen
who
that.
does that? And they're like, every time we take an axial length measurement, they're recording it on their, they've got their notes app open on their phone, and they're making their own personal like journal of everything that's happening. And they get totally wigged out if that kid's axial length over, 3 months went up 0.02. And you're like, wait, no, this is good. Like, it's a normal growth rate. like, so I think it's really important. That's a good, that kind of stirs a thought in my mind to make a good point that you need to prepare these patients that we're not stopping eye growth. We're slowing eye growth. That's our goal. And we're going to do our best for your child. And, you have to make sure that there are correct expectations, or else the parent becomes very disappointed and upset. And these parents, they get high anxiety sometimes, and then they spread that anxiety to their child. And then the children get very upset because they feel like a failure, and they feel like they're disappointing their parents, and they feel like, oh my God, I'm going to go blind. And it's like, no, you're not going to go blind. Like, that's why we're doing this, to slow your eye growth so your eyes can stay healthier. But, these kids, they feel like, well, this is it. I'm nearsighted my eye as long, I'm done. Like, I've had patients come to me, like I've had some adult patients come who are just so concerned that they have literally planned career changes because they have convinced themselves that within a certain number of years they're going to have retinal detachments, and they're not going to be able to have a job that requires them to see. And so they're doing like vocational training to make sure that they can still be a part of the workforce after they lose vision, because they're so convinced that it is predetermined and destined that they are going to lose vision. And so we have to kind of like talk them off the edge a little bit sometimes and say, well, no. Like, okay, first of all, you have two eyes. Thank goodness you have two eyes. But then, like, let's just maybe do more frequent eye exams so that if you do develop glaucoma, we can treat it. So that if you get a retinal tear, it doesn't turn into a retinal detachment. Like, no, like you're at higher risk, sure. But like, let's sit back, calm down, and just do what we need to do to take the best care of your eyes that we can.
It's funny how often I think we inappropriately scare people when we don't have to, just with the verbiage we know and the understanding we know, because we know this much and we're giving them that much, but we give them the worst parts and the worst case scenarios of what it is. And I don't know if we do that because we're just trying to condense what we have, or if we're trying to scare them into believing and trusting us and following treatments. But I've seen that too on all of it, whether it's glaucoma or myopia or whatnot.
I think about glaucoma. When you talk about this, I think about glaucoma, and I think about patients that I've had that have just not returned to clinic, because they had a high eye pressure, and I told them they needed treatment, and I know they've been non-compliant with other providers, and they didn't like what I had to say, and they left, and they never came back to me, and they went to, I don't know where they are, right? Like, I don't know what happened to those people, but they wanted to try and find a doctor who would tell them what they wanted to hear. And I think, well, what could I have said differently to that patient to make them understand that it's a problem that needs to be treated, but also not, scare them to death. Like, it's a hard balance, and every personality is different. And so, like, learning communication skills that really resonate with different personalities is very important.
So you do a lot of, obviously you're very successful in your clinic, but I know you work with a lot of other docs and study groups and whatnot too. Do you have anything that you help teach other doc with, or other advice on how to communicate better, how to communicate effectively so that you get your point across without either undervaluing or over scaring them?
Over scaring, is that a real?
Yeah.
So I think I don't do anything specific to help train doctors on this, but I talk to my externs that rotate through my clinic quite a bit about patient communication, and I talk to my staff a lot about it. And I think what you really need to do if you want to get better at communicating with your patients is two things. Thing one is you need to think about the patient interactions you've had with your doctors when you are the patient. And you need to kind of think about how different doctors resonated with you, how you felt whenever you were given bad news or news that wasn't exactly what you were expecting. And you need to think about what mindset you were in when that doctor was talking to you. And I think empathy goes a long way here, right? So when you can kind of put yourself in that patient's shoes and think, well, how would I be feeling if I was getting bad news? And how would I want to be communicated with? So I think that's thing one. And it's not like we're all going and getting bad eye news, but most of us have either ourselves or had a family member go and maybe get bad medical news at one point in time. So that's thing one. And thing two, I think, is practicing. Practicing when you're not in front of a patient. Practice into the mirror, practice with family members, practice with your children, with your spouse, because the more times you say something, the better you get at it. And you can, if you're practicing with non-eye care providers, you can get their feedback on how you're coming across, especially if they're people that you know really well, like family members. Yeah. So I had one of my externs, and I used to carpool. So her and I would drive in the car, and every time we were in the car together, I would say, okay, today we're going to talk about meibomian gland dysfunction or whatever, fill in the blank. And she would practice her spiel, and then I would give her feedback. And then she would do it again, and I would give her feedback, and then she would do it again. And she got really good at patient communication. Like, it was fantastic. And you just, okay, today's macular degeneration. Okay, today's glaucoma. Okay, today's myopia management. But yeah, and then so one day we had to give my daughter a ride, and my daughter got in the car and she just started talking to her about Demodex. And my daughter was like, oh my God, I have this. No, Martha, she's just practicing. But it was really like she freaked out.
That's awesome.
And it was actually the first time that she had ever done her Demodex talk. And I was like, yeah, okay, so we're going to tone this back and tone that back, because did you see how freaked out my daughter got when you started telling her about this? But yeah, it just practice, because every time you do it, you get better. It comes off your tongue more naturally, and you feel more comfortable talking about it. So yeah, those would be my biggest points of advice.
I love it. I'm so happy you said that. I realized in our office had nothing to do with myopia, but we actually brought in Life Meter. And so we were having the staff talk about Life Meter and measuring skin carotenoids and whatnot. And they were super hesitant. And it finally dawned on me that I never walked them through. I told them what to say, but I never had them practice. And I would never let my kid go play t-ball without picking up a bat, swinging and practicing hitting it off a tee. Shoot, professional baseball players, we go early to the games for batting practice. They get paid millions of dollars a year to do this, maybe $1 million a game, and they're practicing beforehand. And so I was teeing my team up for success, or not teeing them up for success by not forcing them to practice as much as they probably don't like it. So I love hearing that you said that.
Yeah, it's awkward to practice, right? Like
initially, yeah, it's super awkward.
It's so awkward. Like if you're just sitting there in a staff meeting and you're one technician talking to another technician and you want to explain something as though you're talking to a patient, it's goofy feeling because you know that they know already. But you just kind of have to get over that and just practice.
Yep. The other thing that I did is whenever I see my family members, I'll just put my phone in the corner on record so I can go back and listen to what I said during the exam. And I do family because I can't do that with patients. Obviously my family gives me permission. But listening to that on the car ride home is cringing. Just some of the dumb things that come out of my mouth during an exam. And it's helped me refine just junk talking and trying to put in fillers.
That's kind of genius. That's really cool. That's a good idea.
It was good. I realized I repeated the same thing about 10 times in a row. And even after they said, yes, okay, I understand, I'd say it again. I was probably charting while I was saying it, so I wasn't even thinking about what I was saying. I should video record some of these, but it was very eye-opening about how much I said that didn't need to be said. And if I
Hmm.
cut all that out, there's a couple of minutes easily off of the exam or time I can better spend with patient.
Yeah. Wow, that's really cool that you do that. I think I'm going to do that. um, yeah, we talk to patients. We have a lot of practice talking to patients. All of us can be better. Um, and then, some days you're better than other days. If you're tired, or if you're
Oh yeah.
distracted by something going on in your personal life, or if you're distracted about the patient you saw just before them. Um, but I think it's really important when you are with a patient to talk to them in the same way that you would want to be talked to, and always give them a chance to ask questions. Whenever I finish, I always ask patients, and do you have any questions? And it's so funny because patients' immediate response is, no, but I was wondering,
Yeah.
and then I go on to ask a question. But you get these patients, you think you've explained everything so well, and they go up to the front, and pretty soon the staff is asking you, hey, the patient wants to know this, that, or the other. And it's like, oh, we already talked about that. I guess I didn't explain it as well as I thought I explained it. Um, I think an important thing too to remember is sometimes you'll hear doctors talk about, well, let's write a script for it. Let's practice our script.
Yeah.
And I don't like the word script
No.
because that makes it sound like you have to memorize a certain string of words. And the reality is that we all have different personalities and we all communicate slightly differently. And as long as what we're saying is correct, then you can say it however comes out most
Yeah.
naturally, and most authentically from you. And so I think it's okay to let everybody have sort of their own verbiage on stuff as long as what they're saying is accurate.
Yeah. 100%. I don't like rogues or scripted scripts. I like talking points, but I don't like scripted scripts. What I have found as well is that this is old hat for us. We talk to patients, we know what we're talking about. A lot of times it takes time for them to process. And so we're all EHR, I document on an iPad. So I found that I verbally communicate the entire exam treatment strategy to them. And then I'll say, hey, I'm going to give you a minute to process that. I'm going to be quiet while I make my notes. So there's planned pause in there to let them process. Then at the end, I'll come back and ask the questions. Because if I tell them something and say, hey, what do you have a question back? They can't process. So I've tried to find that natural pause time.
I like that. I think that's really wise advice because patients do need time to process. I have found that sometimes when I have externs rotating through the clinic and I hear them communicate with patients, they they talk really, really fast. They communicate really, really fast. And I'm like, no, slow down. Like, say it, pause. It's not an awkward silence to that patient because the patient's thinking,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and so it is okay to have a lot of natural pauses. But I like how you said that you literally tell the patient that you're going to let them think about that for a minute while you're charting. And then
Yep.
if they think of any questions, then you come back and have a few minutes to do that. So that's really cool advice.
Yeah. I thank you. I found that I was just getting overwhelmed in the exam, so I did it for me, and but it worked out well for them. Another thing I just thought of, and I've always done it with kids because it's fun, is I'll force them to ask me a question before they can leave. You can't leave the room until you ask me one question. Because I want it to end on a positive note. Well, I'm assuming the whole exam was positive, but definitely want to end on a fun note. But I think I might start trying that with adults, just to force something. It could be a silly question, but just to give them that safe opportunity to ask a question, because I'm the one forcing them to do it.
I like it. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
I might do
Well,
that too, but only on the days I'm not running behind.
yes. Well, we're never running behind.
Never.
Oh, no, that's fun. So I love externs. Well, love hate because most of the time they're fantastic. Every once in a while, it pulls me back really to basics. But when you have a new extern and you've got them, working with the patient, because we're both in for-profit practices, so we need to make sure that the patients have a good experience.
Right.
Very unlike what the externs experience at school, where it's they can do whatever they want with patients and take however long they want. How do you tee them up to go in and talk about myopia management?
Oh, that's a great question. So, when I have an extern, I only have one extern at a time, and we really work very, very closely. My externs don't run their own schedule. Like, some clinics, they'll have their own schedule of patients, and a lot of times those end up being maybe routine patients while the senior doc gets to see all the fun stuff. My externs get to see everything that I see. We work side by side. And when I have them in clinic, the first thing that they do is they learn how to do all the pre-testing so that they understand all of the equipment, because we have a lot of equipment here. And maybe they're familiar with most of it, some of it maybe they're not. So that's thing one. They spend a couple days just kind of shadowing the techs and actually doing pre-testing on patients. And then we jump pretty quickly into them shadowing me. So they're watching me do exams, and they're listening to how I do patient education, and they're listening how I talk about these things, and kind of the exam flow that we have. And then like we kind of do this sort of transition where they're starting to do part of the exam and I'm shadowing them. And we have a lot of really nice things at my clinic that help us to do this together. Like we've got anterior segment cameras that run on a big screen, so I can see everything they're seeing under the slit lamp and vice versa. And so then once I've been shadowing them at this point, then once we leave the room, then we'll kind of talk about like, how did this go? How did that go? Like, you did really great on this. Maybe you could have done this differently. And so I'm hearing, they've heard me already do my patient education. Then I'm hearing them kind of start to do that on their own, and I give them a lot of feedback. And then once I'm comfortable with that extern, that they're like really doing a good job with this stuff, then I let them go in with patients on their own, and they get to do that patient education themselves, and they get to, interpret the test results with the patients and things like that. And then they'll come back to the office. And meanwhile, I've been watching everything. I've looked at the optomaps, I've looked at the liposcans, I've looked at the topographies, I've like everything I've seen. And I also can access the EHR, and I can see like what they've put in there for, okay, they've got Demodex, okay, they got cataract, right? And then they'll come back, they'll talk to me, and then I'll go in and I'll talk to the patient for a few minutes and kind of, look under the slit lamp so they think I'm doing something too. But I've already actually even watched the slit lamp video from my desk, because that uploads to my computer as well. So I know what their slit lamp looked like. But that way the patient really understands that I am paying quite close attention to their care. And my patients love it. Like my patients compliment my externs all the time. It's like over and over, like, she's really good. Are you how can we convince her to stay here and practice with you? So my patients, they trust my externs. They know I work very closely with them. They know that I'm still paying close attention. And we have, signage up in the exam rooms. This is a teaching facility, so that they know. And my patients have kind of been trained. They a lot of times expect that. If I have a day where I don't have an extern with me, they're like, "Oh, where's your extern today?" So that's pretty nice. We've got a really great culture with that. But yeah, it's a lot of, in teaching these externs how to talk about myopia management, it's a lot of first they get to see me do it, and then they get to do it. Practice, practice, practice.
Yep. Well, we're very similar. We have one at a time, and we run about 1.8 full-time equivalent docs. I've got a total of 4 docs that rotate through that, all very different. But I like that you said you start them in pre-test. I do as well, not just so that they learn the equipment, but I think it's important they learn the value of what the technicians do, because they're going to have to be working with them. And if you don't understand what they do and what that role is like, it's really hard to work with them and to understand their shoes. We make them follow all the doctors, and they're all very different. They learn all sorts of different personalities, and I make them give us little presentations on how each of them do well and what they think is maybe unique or something they don't like about it. And but I like hearing how they present things. I steal from it, but I make them as well question, hey, what did you think about this, or what could I have done better? So I try to turn them into my coach, really for selfish reasons, just because I'm trying to always do better.
Yeah, I truly believe that having externs has made me a better doctor. I think it's made me a better communicator, because every time you watch somebody else do something well, you can kind of figure out how you can do that as well.
Yeah. So, and I think that it's, to your point as well, for the patients, it's great for them. They relate to them on a different level than they relate to me, because I'm the doctor. They're that in between not quite yet. So I think that once I leave the room, they ask them if, I'm really know what I'm talking about, or if that's really what they should be doing. That's kind of that, that friendly check-in.
Yeah, and sometimes too, the patients are, it's almost like them getting two opinions.
Mm-hmm.
So they're getting extra bang for their buck. They've had two different doctors now tell them, one is a doctor in training, but they've had two different doctors tell them a similar thing.
So yeah, it's super valuable. Do you ever bring in your staff into the exam room so they can see how you're speaking to patients?
Yeah, often we have staff kind of rotate through in scribe positions and things like that, especially when we have enough staff to allow that. So, they've heard it a lot. And a lot of times so we wear little radio communication headsets, and a lot of times I'll bring the staff back when I'm wrapping up. But a lot of times there's still a little bit of patient communication going on because the patient will have another question, or the staff got there faster than I thought they would get there. And so they get to hear like bits of that very, very frequently.
Oh, that's cool. Like the CIA or the Secret
Yeah.
Service little headsets. Nice.
Yeah, it's really convenient. Do you use those?
I don't. We had just a light system that went out, and so we're trying to find a new system.
Using the little headsets is really great. I think it could be more challenging in a larger office with so many providers, but it's fantastic because if I'm back in the exam room, I can very discreetly call for an optician or a technician or whatever. If I decide, oh my gosh, I really want to get, we didn't do OCTs, let's do OCTs. I can call for a technician, they'll come back and do OCT. Or let's say they scheduled an emergency and they know that I don't know that because I'm in the exam room. They can get on the headset and they can say, hey, we scheduled a 1:30 emergency. And then I'm like, well, I better quit talking to this patient about, golf. Like we better wrap this up. Because maybe I thought I had an extra 10 minutes to just kind of,
Uh-huh.
talk about socialize with this patient. So that's kind of handy. Just to be able to have those sort of secret communications, or like, let's say you're in the room and you get a vasovagal, right? And you want help stat. So like my patient or my staff knows, like we have certain like key phrases. So if I'm like, I need bottled water right away in room 4, they know pretty much that means we've got a vasovagal and I'm going to want help getting this patient to the floor, making sure that they don't hit their head or whatever. And to the patient, it makes sense because they're feeling thirsty. Like a lot of times when they get that vasovagal, they get really thirsty all of a sudden. So I don't have to be like, we've got a code red, or anything that sounds really scary. But can we get a water right away in room 4? And then the staff is like, oof, they know, get there fast. They know, drop what they're doing and somebody needs to get there fast.
Oh, I like that. That's smart. I'll have to talk with you about what systems you're using.
Yeah, I will do that. I can send you a link to the radios we buy.
Yeah, no, please do. Do you have any of your staff do the education for myopia?
Oh yeah, for sure. So we attend a big conference every year that I help kind of plan, and I bring staff every year. I'm bringing 2 staff this year. I've brought multiple staff in the past. And it's really great because there are some staff certification courses and staff tracks. And boy, oh boy, when staff feel comfortable with that, myopia is something that takes a lot of patient education time. And if you can hand that off to staff, that will save you so much time. It will convert more patients. You'll end up caring for those patients better. You'll have better success. And that's really nice for a practice because myopia can be financially very helpful to a practice if you need to be creating some revenue that's sort of outside of these managed care plans. So yeah, staff education is very, very key. Any sort of online education you can do for them, in-person conferences, it's all very good.
Well, and brag a little bit because I know you spend a lot of time planning working on the conference. So what conference is it? How long is it?
So it's Vision by Design, and it's put on by the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control, which I'm currently the president for that organization, and I help lead the education committee. So we are having our conference this year in Chicago. It's September 6th through 9th. The first 2 days we have a boot camp for beginners, which is awesome for anybody who's interested in myopia management, but maybe feeling a little bit intimidated. It gives you everything you need to know, including orthokeratology, but not exclusive to orthokeratology. And then we spend Thursday, Friday, Saturday doing a general session and a scientific session. And so that dives deeper for doctors who feel more comfortable and they want to kind of reach that next level of myopia management. A lot of boot campers do end up staying for the general session. But sometimes you're just so fried after those 2 days of boot camp where your brain is like literally exploding with so much information. Sometimes it's good to just start with boot camp and kind of go from there.
Very cool. Well, that's an awesome conference. And I think that the last time I looked at stats, it looked only about 10, 11% of optometrists, at least in the U.S., are actively engaged in myopia management. So it's a lot of opportunity, a lot of, to your point, it's another revenue stream that's currently outside of managed vision care and insurance, but there's a need for it, which is more important.
There is a need for it. It's beneficial for everybody for us to be doing myopia management. We get compensated well. Our patients have definitely increased quality of life, increased eye health by going through myopia management. And it's just so prevalent now. We talked about staff training. At Vision by Design, we have the boot camp. Techs are pre-testers, para-optometrics, whatever you want to call them. They attend that boot camp, and we have recently launched an online boot camp that technicians can do. They can do that virtually on demand, and they can get certified. My technician, Crystal, my para-optometric Crystal, she is a Certified Myopia Navigator, CMN, and that's the AAOMC's certification for para-optometrics to prove competence in this area.
Nice. I love that name, Certified Myopia Navigator.
Yes.
Oh, I love that.
So she's helping navigate the ship.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. I
Thank
love
you.
it. And I think it's important too for our staff. You made the kind of comment earlier when you have enough of them, because staffing I think is always going to be a challenge, and one way or another. But having professional development opportunities for them is crucial. Otherwise, it's a job.
It makes it more than a job. When you can help your staff grow and learn these things, they feel empowered. They feel so much job satisfaction. They feel loyalty to you as their doctor because you are helping them attain this. So yeah, you want to get good staff. You want to keep good staff. You want to have good culture in your office. Give them these opportunities. If not with other subspecialties, with myopia management, it's a great one. Staff get very excited about it, and they feel like they've really accomplished a lot when they do this, especially I think since it's such a new field, because they feel, I think, really special being on the front end of something that's new and exciting in eye care. I know my staff feels very empowered by it.
Oh, absolutely. And it's exciting for them, right? When they get to be part of the healthcare team other than a button pusher on an autorefractor. And
For sure.
It's a very different experience for them, and it's better for the patient. I think there's higher compliance. I've seen it with our team and what they've done.
Yeah, it does improve compliance. That's for sure.
That's awesome. So to find out about that, where would somebody go to look at the CMN?
So the CMN, this is a hard question because we are launching a new website at the end of this month. I believe the web address will be the same. The AAOMC's website is.
We didn't plan this ahead of time. I'm putting you on the spot. I apologize.
I know. I think.
Let me see. AAOMC.org.
Is it org? Okay. So American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control can be found at AAOMC.org. I always second guess if it's org or com.
There's too many. It's that's funny, and we didn't prepare that, like I said, so it kind of went down a fun little rabbit hole. So, so AAOMC.org, and it'll be relaunched at the end of the month, which hopefully will be probably when we're soon once we launch this episode. So that's exciting. And how long is the certification process online?
It's kind of a learn at your own pace. It is on demand. So we've made it very affordable for practices. I believe the committee that was working on it, I believe that there's a cutoff between 1 to 5 staff. And then if you have greater than 6 staff, there's a little bit of a jump in price. But it's very affordable for practices to, offer this to their staff, multiple staff, doing it on demand. I think there's 5 or 6 modules with little quizzes within each module. So it just kind of depends on how quickly you can kind of go through it. There are recorded lectures for them to watch. And I would say that somebody could get through it, in a month or two if they were really diligent.
All right. Quick technical difficulties, but we are back. So we were wrapping up talking about the myopia certification for staff, the CMN. And we had figured out that the website is the AAOMC.org.
Yes.
And so, and you were just walking us through that there were different booking levels and blocking levels. And I'm sure when we log in, we'll be able to see what the cost is. I think almost any cost in educating staff is well worth it.
I think it's like $199 up to 5 staff and like $299 for greater than 5. You have access for a year.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very affordable, intentionally very affordable.
Very much so. That's a no-brainer. If you've got someone that once they learn the basics in the office, know the EHR, and is on that side, if this is a focus, I think that's an absolute no-brainer. And I don't know what you do, but in our office, we make education. Well, now we make earning credentials mandatory as part of their welcome letter. So if they don't hit what we've outlined by the end of the first year, we've got a reason to say this isn't working out. And we don't do it because we want to get rid of people. We do it because we want them to develop and grow.
We do pay raises when people get more letters behind their names.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, we do the same thing. We incentivize it. I pay for all the study materials. I pay for the tests. I don't reimburse. I pay for it because I think it's important that we put our money where our mouth is. And, but they need to study on their own time. They need to study at hours. They've got to put in the work. They're more than welcome to bring their questions to us, but I'm not going to teach you. I'm going to help, answer questions. But, I think that the more they immediately get a raise once they get the letters after their name. And then once they've showed that they can use those to bring a higher return for themselves to the office, they get another raise.
That's pretty good. That's a sweet deal. It's very motivating for people to do that. But, money isn't always the biggest motivator. Like you said earlier, sense of purpose and a feeling of accomplishment is a really big motivator for a lot of people too.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Daniel Pink agrees with it too. His little caricature video, you can YouTube it, but he talks about from the book Drive, what motivates people. I just like having the money talk with them up front so they know that that's not part of the issue. Let's get that off the table and talk about the good stuff.
Cool. I love it.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you were able to jump back on for the last 3 minutes here. So we can finish up and wrap it up. Cheryl, always a pleasure chatting with you. And I dig that Neon Kids sign behind you. That's super cool.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got neon all over the office. We got the suns and all sorts of stuff. We are in the middle of construction as well. You can see the tile wall is going up, and we need to move those 2 signs. But yeah, we always get a lot of compliments on our neon. When we started renovating the office, a lot of my patients were very concerned we were going to get rid of the neon. They were begging me, don't get rid of the neon. I will not get rid of the neon.
That's cool. Very cool.
Chris Wolf's dad, Steve, who started this office, and his wife, Maria, picked out the neon. And she's really delighted to see that we've kept the neon all these years.
That's cool. Yeah. That makes it even better. I like it even more.
Yeah.
So, awesome. Well, Cheryl, thanks for making time. I know it's end of your day and you got kids to go home to, and we've talked enough nerd talk today. So
it was fun and a pleasure as always. I hope to talk to you again soon, Aaron.
Definitely. Awesome. Take care.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.